Teaching is a difficult job. Teachers have the responsibility to educate the next generation of every society. They teach them how to behave, how to think, and how to be useful members of the community. In their career, teachers have a lot of questions. This book tries to answer the most common questions teachers ask. In this book, you will learn why your students hate being in your class and why they hate school in general. By understanding the reason, you can plan lessons that are more enjoyable for your students. You will also learn why standardized tests are very important for students. When you know the importance of these tests, you can explain it to your students so that they won't think that school tests are worthless. Since memory is essential for learning, this book will teach you how to make your students remember what you want them to. You will also learn how to explain difficult concepts and make them easy to remember. If you have students in your class that they are giving you a hard time understanding your materials, this book will teach you how to vary your teaching methods to cope with different learning styles that your students may have. This book has all the answers you need to build the perfect lesson plan. If you want to be loved by your students, this book will help you be the best teacher you can be. Are you ready to learn how to update your teaching method? Then, no one liked their first day of school, and most students keep hating school forever. This is a problem for teachers because they can't teach when no one is interested in learning. Science proves that students don't like school because the human brain was created to hate thinking. Unlike other senses such as sight, thinking is slow, difficult, and boring. Usually, we spend our days repeating the same patterns and relying on our memory just to avoid thinking of something new. The only way a human would enjoy thinking is if he faces a problem that he can solve, then enjoys the pleasure of succeeding at finding the right solution. Because of this pleasure, people look for problems that are challenging but easy to solve. Teachers can use this fact to their advantage. They can design classroom activities that will pose problems that are attained by the students. Let's say you ask your students a question. You ask them about the Civil War. Before you design your lesson plan, you should consider the difficulty and the level of challenge the question has. Try to avoid asking easy questions because your students will not be interested in answering. If you ask difficult questions, they will give up even before trying. So you need to find something in between, not so easy and not so difficult. You should also consider the background knowledge of your students. Based on what you have been teaching them, are they able to use their memory to draw back some facts to answer your question? Another point to keep in mind is not giving too much information at once. Your students' memorization capacity is limited. Don't just narrate an overload of facts. Try to slow down from time to time. You can also try to use memory aids, such as pictures, writing on the blackboard, or movies. You need to help your students memorize, otherwise, they won't be able to make connections between old knowledge and new knowledge. If you ask a question and you notice that your students don't have enough background knowledge to answer, try to clarify the essential ideas right away. You need to be quick, or you can lose their attention. At first, you may find it difficult to ask the right questions that will keep your students interested. Over time, you'll learn what kind of questions your students like. You can keep taking notes in every session. Then when you go home, you can try to study your notes and find improvements. Just because the brain doesn't like to think, it doesn't mean you should give up on your students. Keep on trying to give them problems that they can solve, and their pleasure of success will make them like your class. Some students don't like school because they think that school tests are not beneficial. Tests don't push students to analyze and think, they just ask for facts. The process of learning just to fill in the exam sheet has made school boring for students. Even some teachers feel the same way towards the standardized way of testing students. What both these students and teachers ignore is that no one can answer a question without having background knowledge. Teaching and testing facts are very important. It teaches student vocabulary, how to connect ideas together, how to memorize, and how to understand complicated concepts. For example, background knowledge helps your students understand what other writers have written. They can read and understand the deep meaning of words and sentences. Just because a sentence is understood alone, it doesn't mean that it can be understood once connected with another sentence. Let's say you give your students sentence A and B. To live is the rarest thing. A, Most people just exist. B. Let's say your students understand the meaning of sentence A. They know that to live is the rarest thing means that only a few people can live. They are also able to understand that sentence B, most people exist, means that most people have a place in this world. The issue is in the ability to make a connection between sentence A and sentence B. The only way students can learn how to make logical connections between words, phrases, and sentences are if they are taught enough background knowledge. When students are knowledgeable, they can understand that sentence A and B mean that living is different from existing. Some people live their life and enjoy it to the fullest, while other people live a boring life where they just exist like any other object in this world. Students can even understand that this sentence is a quote that was written to motivate people to live a better life. In the future, this quote can help change the student's life, and they may use it to change other people's lives. Reading is based on making connections between sentences to understand the hidden meaning of writers. Without background knowledge, students can't make these connections. When both students understand the importance of teaching and learning facts, the standardized test becomes more meaningful. Why do students remember everything that's on television and forget everything I say? Another problem some teachers face is the problem of memory. When a teacher comes to class trying to explain something new based on old knowledge, they are surprised to notice that their students don't remember anything. A student can remember the story of a whole movie, but they forget everything the teacher says. This problem is because the teacher teaches his class in a way that he thinks suitable for his students. He expects his students to remember exactly what he intended them to remember. But students only remember what they want to remember. Students remember what they think about the most because that's how the brain works. When a person thinks about something for too long, the brain decides that this thing is important to keep in the memory. If he doesn't think about it at all, the brain decides to dump it, and the person won't remember it at all. A teacher can use this fact to make students remember what he wants by making them think about it for too long. Let's take the example of an activity taught in two different ways by teacher A and B. The activity is to draw a diagram of the plot structure of a book the students read. The teachers hoped their students would understand the structure of the story and how writers organize the plot. Teacher A asked his students to draw pictures to explain different plot points. During this class, the students were enjoying drawing castles and horses and all kinds of interpretations of the story. Teacher B asked his students to write the plot structure that they have managed to understand from reading the book. These students were busy trying to remember what they read and making connections between different ideas. They thought hard about finishing this task. What approach do you think is best for teaching the students to remember the plot structure of the book? Of course, it's the approach that Teacher B followed. Teacher A asked his students to draw the plot. As a result, the students' attention was focused on drawing perfect shapes and using the perfect colors. They forgot about the idea and the book. They didn't try to make connections or remember the plot points of the story they read. On the other hand, Teacher B asked his students to build a diagram using words. When writing their plot structure for the book, the students were forced to remember the story they read and think hard about making connections and building the perfect plot structure for the book. You should think like Teacher B. Always come up with ways to make your students think about what you want them to remember. Otherwise, they may not remember anything at all. Why is it so hard for students to understand abstract ideas? When we were in school, we had difficulty understanding math. Students usually hate math because it is a subject that's built upon abstract ideas which are not easy to be understood. Teachers struggle to explain abstract ideas. Since abstraction is the ability to apply knowledge learned in school in real-life situations, it is the goal of any school. So teachers are always trying to teach these concepts to students, even if they're difficult. Studies prove that students understand new ideas by going back to old ideas that they have learned in the past. So they use their memory to learn something new. Let's say that you want to teach your students the meaning of government. You want them to understand that a group of people can live together following the same rules that guarantee the well-being of everyone. If you try to give them the meaning of the word directly, the students will not be able to understand because this concept is very new to them. They may lose focus, and by losing focus, they will leave your class not remembering anything you said. Because you don't want that to happen, you should try to explain the concept of government by giving them examples that they can understand. You can try to use their knowledge of how their families work. In a family, the parents are the ones taking care of the house, and they are the ones making the rules. A family is just like a government. You can try to go deeper by asking them how their families work. They can give you examples of the rules they have at home or the rules they have in the classroom. Once the new idea of the meaning of a government is connected with familiar examples, students can understand and will remember the word. Don't let teaching your students new ideas scare you, because you can use their background knowledge to make them understand. Is drilling worth it? Drilling refers to learning by practicing the same thing over and over again. Some believe that drilling kills creativity within students because when students keep repeating knowledge, they are not thinking, but only using their memory. Without practice, students can't be good at any skill. Drilling is essential because it helps students master what they've been learning and prepares them to improve. Since the human brain can learn a limited amount of knowledge at once, when students master a new skill, using it will become automatic, and it will not require much effort or memory from the brain. Students then can move on to learn something new because there is free space in their working memory. For example, when students first learned math, they started by learning simple equations, such as combining 2 and 3 to get the result 5. At first, students used their fingers to count to 2, then add 3 fingers to get the result 5. Over time, they can use their brain instead. They start with a mental image of 2, and they keep counting until they reach 5. This method can only be used to solve easy problems. If you ask your students to solve a bigger problem such as 15 plus 32, they will not be able to answer using the method you taught them. This kind of problem requires the brain to work hard and use a lot of working memory space. The students would add 2 to 5 and get 7. He would have to write the answer down, otherwise he will forget. Then he would proceed by adding 1 to 3 and get 4. Now he can look at what he wrote down and give you the full answer 47. Now, if a student didn't memorize that 5 plus 2 equals 7, he would have to be using his fingers to count. The more practice the student gets to solve math problems, the easier he will be able to succeed. When the student doesn't practice simple equations, he will never be able to move on to solve more difficult problems. He will be stuck, and he won't be able to improve. So when students keep practicing the same thing over and over again, it's not killing their creativity, but it's teaching them how to think faster. And when solving the current problem becomes easy for them, they can move on to learn something new. What's the secret to getting students to think like real scientists, mathematicians, and historians? Because school is based on teaching facts, it's rare when a student grows up to think like a scientist. The school doesn't teach you how to think like a researcher, so how can we expect students to become scientists if we're not teaching them how to be one? The difference between a scientist and a student is the focus. Students focus on knowledge, while experts have an eye for details. They can come up with creative solutions, and they can use abstract concepts in their real lives and other domains as well. Experts also practice so hard until their knowledge becomes automatic for them, so their brain is always ready to think of something new. These differences make expecting students to think like scientists unrealistic. Students cannot think like an expert just because they don't have the same amount of knowledge or practice. It takes years of practice before a person can master what he does. Your students are just learning these new concepts, so teachers should lower their expectations. To explain further, let's see the difference between the way you teach science to your students and the way experts learn science. When you teach in science class something new, you ask your students to prepare at home. So they read from their textbooks at home, and they come to class to learn more from you. You explain everything and you assign them a project. After choosing their partner, they work on a project that will reinforce their understanding of the lesson further. That's the way science classes work all over the world. This process can't teach your students to think like scientists. When scientists experiment, it's because they want to find answers to a new hypothesis. They ignore the kind of result they may get because they are experimenting. In your class, students did an experiment to understand the outcome you have already taught them. They are not experimenting. they are practicing. Another difference is that scientists have been working in the lab for years, while your students have a few classes each week. The amount of knowledge and experience is so different, so it's impossible to compare both parties to one another. You can't expect your students to think like scientists because you're not teaching them to be scientists. All you are teaching them is knowledge. How should I adjust my teaching for different types of learners? Another issue that teachers struggle with is the problem of diversity, not in gender or in the race, but in terms of learning styles. Some students prefer to learn from pictures. They are called visual learners. Some students prefer to learn from sounds, and they are called auditory learners. Other students learn using receptors from their different body parts, and they are called kinesthetic learners. Teachers can try to solve the problems of learning styles using this method. They can try to vary their teaching methods so that every learner can benefit from the course. Imagine that you are a biology teacher. In your class, you notice that one student is really struggling to understand what you're trying to explain. Let's name this student Sarah. You try to explain over and over again, you even try to teach her one-on-one, but nothing is working. Sarah just doesn't understand biology. So you decide to ask her other teachers about her. You find out that Sarah likes poetry, and she is so good at writing them. What can you do in this situation? You can try to help Sarah understand biology by connecting it to her poetry class. You may ask her to write poetry about what you're trying to teach her. You can even collaborate with her poetry teacher and ask him for help. Let's say that you have another student who doesn't understand one lesson in your class. You may not have noticed that this student didn't understand your lesson until the day of the exam. You see that he got a low score. His parents decide to help their son, so they come to you for an explanation. They try to tell you that their son doesn't understand details, but understands when ideas are explained in general. So you try to explain the same lesson again using a holistic approach. You give your students another quiz, and you notice that Sam's score improved. Looking at teaching as a responsibility to try to help every student understand using his way may sound difficult. Over time, you will understand your students' different styles of learning, and everything will get easier. Conclusion. Because teaching is difficult, most teachers are always looking for new ways to improve their teaching methods. Their goal is to guide a generation of students that are qualified to enter the working field and help their society grow. Teachers frequently ask some questions. This book can answer the most common ones. In this book, you have learned how to make your students like school. By keeping them interested and challenging them, you can make learning enjoyable for your students. You learned how to make your students remember and how to explain new concepts using their memory. Once your students have enough knowledge, introducing new and more challenging ideas can be easy. You also learned the importance of drilling and testing. Drilling is the practice every student needs to memorize old knowledge and be able to move on to learn something new. If you have been suffering from your learners' differences, this book has taught you how to use various teaching techniques for different learning styles. Once your students are capable of getting high scores in their tests, you will be happy. Remember to never compare your students to experts or scientists. Your students are just learning, so don't try to expect the impossible. Stay strong, stay positive, and happy teaching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more content. Thank you for watching.